I still remember that day like it was burned into my memory forever, the day I was supposed to be part of something magical, something everyone dreamed about, and yet they treated me like I didn't exist. The invitations were sent, the flowers were arranged, the photographers had their cameras ready, but me, they shoved me into the kitchen. Not because I was late, not because I messed up, not because I had done anything wrong, simply because I wasn't important enough to be seen. As I scrubbed the endless rows of dishes, I could hear laughter and music from the grand hall. The clinking of glasses, the soft murmur of people mingling, the occasional sharp gasp of excitement. And then it happened. The guest list was announced over the speakers for everyone to hear. I froze. My heart stopped. They were bringing out names that I could hardly believe. Names that belonged to celebrities, politicians, influencers, people I had only seen on TV or in magazines. And then one name hit me like a punch in the chest, a royal guest. Someone so high up, so untouchable that even being in the same room as them would have been a dream for me. And here I was stuck behind the steaming pots, my hands covered in soap and water, invisible to everyone. I watched them all laugh, shake hands, take selfies, toast to the night, and I felt a storm rise inside me. Not just anger, but humiliation so deep it burned my skin. Every polite smile they offered, every bow and nod felt like a dagger twisting in my chest. I had been told this was my role, my place in the evening, but the injustice of it all made my mind spin with thoughts I had never allowed myself to think before. And then I noticed something small, subtle, almost unnoticeable. A mistake, a tiny oversight in the event planning that no one seemed to catch. It was nothing big to anyone else, but to me, standing there in the shadows, it was everything. My fingers itched with the realization that maybe, just maybe, being invisible wasn't the worst thing that could happen that night. I kept scrubbing, pretending I was absorbed in my work, but my mind raced. I began to watch the people, memorizing faces, noticing alliances, whispers, who held power and who faked it. Every laugh, every toast, every whispered secret in the corner, I caught it all. And that's when I started to see a path, not a way to join them, but a way to turn the game upside down. The music swelled, the speeches continued, and I felt an unfamiliar calm settle over me. They thought I was just a kitchen servant, a background shadow, someone to be forgotten by the time dessert was served. But the truth is, shadows see everything, shadows remember everything, and shadows can wait. Then, just as the royal guest moved closer to the main stage, something unexpected happened. Something that made the room pause, the chatter die down, and the attention shift in a way no one could have predicted. My pulse raced. My moment was coming, but I had to be patient. I had to let it unfold. I wiped my hands one last time, took a deep breath, and stepped into the corner where no one would see me, but I knew exactly what I was going to do next. The doors to the hall opened wider, the camera shifted, and suddenly, everything about the night was about to change, but I couldn't let anyone know I was watching, waiting, plotting. I stayed in that corner invisible, feeling my heartbeat pound like a drum against my chest. Every step they took in the grand hall echoed in my mind. The royal guest, the one name that had shattered my chest earlier, moved gracefully through the crowd. People bowed, photographers clicked endlessly, and the host laughed too loudly, trying to impress. I could see the fear beneath their smiles, the tiny cracks in their perfect facade as I watched. My mind kept replaying the way they had treated me. How easily they dismissed me, shuffled me aside, made me feel like I was nothing. And yet I realized something vital. They had underestimated me completely. That thought felt intoxicating. I wasn't just angry, I was starting to feel powerful. A dark, calm, dangerous power that comes from knowing your target doesn't even see you as a threat. I moved quietly to the corner near the back door, careful not to draw attention. No one noticed me, not even the staff checking the desserts, the waiters carrying trays, or the event coordinators who prided themselves on controlling every detail. Being in the kitchen had given me something the others didn't have: perspective. I could see every entrance, every exit, every movement of the crowd, every whispered secret, every hidden glance. That was when I noticed something no one else seemed to. The royal guest wasn't just attending, they were scanning, observing. Their eyes lingered on certain people, certain staff, with a subtle calculation that made my stomach tighten. They were watching for something, or someone. And suddenly, the injustice of being shoved into the kitchen felt like it might be my advantage. I pulled out my phone, pretending to check messages, but really just recording details, faces, names, conversations. My mind worked like a camera, storing everything. Every insult I had ever endured, every humiliation, every whisper behind my back, they had all led to this night. And now I could see the pieces fall into place like a puzzle I had been assembling without even realizing it. Minutes passed like hours, the music swelling, the applause ringing, and I noticed the first real slip. The host, trying desperately to impress, had overlooked something crucial, a misplaced security badge that allowed access to the private lounge. Just a small mistake, but in the chaos of their arrogance, it could become my opening. I didn't rush. I stayed calm, letting it simmer, knowing that patience would make the payoff sweeter. Then came the toast. Everyone raised their glasses. The royal guests smiled politely, and I watched as people fawned over them. But my attention was elsewhere. I saw the subtle tension, the hidden alliances, the way people leaned in to whisper while pretending to laugh. This event wasn't just a celebration, it was a battlefield of ego and influence. And I had been given a vantage point no one else had. I slipped back to the kitchen briefly, pretending to fetch something, and listened. The catering staff, who thought I was just one of them, spoke freely about the chaos in the hall. They didn't know I could hear everything. They complained about the arrogant guests, about the expensive mistakes, about the people who believe themselves untouchable. I absorbed it all, storing every word. By the time the dessert was being served, the mood in the hall had shifted. The royal guest had noticed the small mistake, their eyes narrowing ever so slightly, and the host was scrambling to fix it. People were distracted, fumbling with speeches, and I felt the first thrill of anticipation. Their confidence was cracking, their arrogance was showing, and I was still invisible. I stepped closer to the doorway, just enough to see the main table without being seen. My hands were steady, my breathing controlled. I could feel the night turning, feel the opportunity forming like a storm on the horizon. I had been humiliated, dismissed, pushed aside, but now I was the one holding the secret that could unravel the entire evening. The royal guest moved closer to the stage, their smile polite, but their eyes sharp, calculating. I noticed the way the crowd parted for them, how some whispered in awe while others faked smiles. And then it happened. A small, almost unnoticeable slip, the royal guest's personal assistant left a folder unattended on a nearby chair. Not just any folder, it looked important. I couldn't see the contents, but the tension in the room told me everything. This was the moment. I held my breath, imagining the chaos that could unfold if the wrong person noticed it, or the right person. I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in years. For once, I wasn't powerless. For once, I had the advantage, the invisible edge that no one else saw coming. And as I watched, a plan began forming in my mind, slow, deliberate, perfect in its patience. I didn't move yet. I waited, letting the noise of the hall and the clinking of glasses cover my presence. Every detail mattered. Every second counted. The royal guests laughed at a joke I couldn't hear, and people leaned in, pretending to share the moment, but I could see the cracks. They were human, vulnerable, not invincible, and I had been invisible all night, unseen, underestimated, overlooked. The moment I had been waiting for was coming. I could feel it like electricity in the air. My heart pounded, my mind raced, but my hands were steady. I was ready to step out of the shadows. Ready to make them see me, not just as the girl in the kitchen, but as someone who had been watching, remembering, and waiting for the right moment. And then a commotion at the main table. Something small, a subtle mistake, but enough to make people turn, to distract them, to create a crack in the perfect facade of the evening. I smiled just slightly. The night was shifting. The balance of power was tilting. And I was still invisible. I wiped my hands one more time, adjusted my apron, and took a careful step toward the doorway that led to the hall. Every nerve in my body was alive with anticipation. The royal guest had no idea, none whatsoever, that the person they had overlooked all night was about to change everything. The crowd didn't notice me. The cameras didn't capture me. The host didn't see me. But I saw everything. And I knew deep down that by the end of this night, nothing would ever be the same. I paused right at the threshold, listening to the laughter, the polite chatter, the applause, and the subtle tension that had begun to ripple through the room. It was almost perfect. Almost. And then from across the hall, a familiar face caught my eye, someone who had humiliated me earlier in the week, someone who had whispered, "You don't belong here." Their eyes met mine for just a second, and I could see recognition flicker, followed by confusion. The moment was mine. The storm was ready. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of every injustice, every humiliation, every overlooked slight. I was done being invisible. I was done being dismissed. And tonight, I would make sure they remembered me. But first, I had to wait. One wrong move and everything could fall apart. The tension in my chest tightened as I stepped fully into the hall, still unnoticed, still underestimated. The royal guest laughed again, the crowd cheered, and the night moved on, oblivious to the storm that had quietly arrived. And just as I moved closer, my phone buzzed with a message I wasn't expecting. A message that made my stomach drop, my hands shake slightly, and my mind race with possibilities. Someone knew something. Someone was watching me too. I froze. The room swirled around me, the music booming, the ladder echoing, but my eyes were locked on that tiny notification. It was small, subtle, almost easy to ignore, but I couldn't. Not now. Not ever. The royal guests raised their glass for another toast. Cameras clicked. The host smiled nervously. And I stood in the shadows, feeling the storm inside me ready to break. And then I realized something chilling. Someone else in that room had been waiting too. I felt a chill run down my spine. My hands had gone cold, even though the kitchen warmth was still clinging to my skin from earlier. That message, it wasn't random. It wasn't a mistake. Someone knew I was there. Someone knew what I was planning, and somehow they were watching me closely. I couldn't see them, but I could feel it. The hairs on my arms stood up, every instinct screaming at me that the night had just grown far more dangerous and far more thrilling. I glanced around the hall, trying to spot who it could be. Everyone was laughing, clinking glasses, nodding politely, pretending the night was flawless. But beneath the polite veneer, I could sense subtle shifts, whispers behind hands, glances darting just a fraction too long, a nervous cough here, a faint flicker of panic there. These people were masters of appearances, but no one is perfect. Everyone slips at some point, and I had learned long ago to watch for the slip. I moved slowly along the edge of the hall, keeping myself in the shadows. The royal guest, still at the center of attention, didn't notice me. No one did. But the message on my phone kept flashing in my mind. We know. Be careful. My heart hammered. Part of me wanted to panic, to retreat to the safety of the kitchen, to scrub my hands raw and pretend the night hadn't happened. But another part, a darker, more patient part, whispered in my mind. This is your advantage, you've waited too long to run now. I took a deep breath, letting the chaos around me blur into background noise. I focused on one thing, the royal guest. Everything else could wait. They were the key to the night, the person who held the power, the person who could make or break everything I had endured. And yet, even they were vulnerable. I could see it now in the slight hesitation of their steps, the forced smile. The way they subtly adjusted their cufflinks as if to anchor themselves in confidence. That's when I noticed it. A misplacement, just a tiny one, but enough to unravel the perfect image they were trying to project. Their coat, draped over the chair, blocked a small access point to the stage. No one noticed it, but I did, and my mind started racing, connecting the dots. One small slip could cascade into a sequence of chaos, a chain reaction that no one could control. I edged closer, careful to stay in the shadows. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Tonight changes everything. Watch carefully. I froze. How did they know? Who was sending these cryptic warnings? Was it an ally or someone planning to outplay me? I didn't have time to analyze. I had to act. Every instinct screamed that patience was critical. Wait, observe, and strike at the perfect moment. That's what I had learned from every slight, every insult, every dismissal I had ever faced. Patience was a weapon, and tonight it was mine. I glanced at the floor plan in my mind. The hall was crowded, but there were blind spots, pockets of shadow where no one would notice me. The stage was slightly elevated, the cameras focused on the royal guest and the host. The overlooked corners, the service doors, the stairwell, the small alcoves near the bar were all opportunities. I realized I had become a predator in a forest of prey, and they didn't even know I existed. And then I saw it, a waiter distracted, dropping a tray of champagne glasses. The clatter echoed through the hall. People gasped, some laughed nervously. But I saw it as a signal, a crack in their perfect, controlled world. Everyone turned their attention for a moment, just enough that the royal guest's eyes flickered toward the commotion, just enough that I could take the first step toward my plan. I moved. Quietly, deliberately, closer to the stage, my phone tucked in my hand, recording details, storing faces, noting reactions. Every laugh, every nervous glance, every subtle frown, it was all data. All leverage, and leverage was power. Then, from across the hall, I noticed her, a familiar face I hadn't expected, the woman who had orchestrated my earlier humiliation, the one who had whispered, "You don't belong here." Her eyes found mine for a fraction of a second. I saw recognition, surprise, and fear. It thrilled me. The seed of revenge began to take root, growing stronger with every heartbeat. But I couldn't act yet. Patience, observation, timing. I had learned long ago that the first move too early often ruined everything. So I kept moving, blending into shadows, watching her reactions, noting the subtle alliances she relied upon, the people she trusted blindly. The royal guest was finishing their toast, raising a glass as the crowd erupted in applause. Everyone cheered, everyone except me. I wasn't cheering, I was calculating. And the storm inside me grew with every second. I realized something terrifyingly exhilarating. I had the power tonight. I had been invisible all night, underestimated, ignored, and now I could decide the pace of everything. My phone buzzed again. A third message, his watching. Don't let him see you. I froze. My pulse quickened. Someone else in the hall, someone I hadn't accounted for, was aware of my presence. My stomach twisted with a mix of fear and excitement. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was a dangerous game of observation, deception, and strategy, and the stakes were higher than I had imagined. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage. I could see the royal guest clearly now. They were distracted, unaware of the storm gathering at the corners of the room. The host was flustered, fumbling with the microphone, trying to maintain control. And the woman who had humiliated me earlier, she was nervously sipping her drink, scanning the room, probably unaware that the person she had dismissed all night was now inches away from changing everything. I took another deep breath, steadying my nerves. I knew I had one chance, one precise moment to tilt the night in a way that no one would forget. My hands tingled with anticipation. Every slight, every insult, every ignored plea I had suffered led to this moment, and I wasn't going to waste it. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the royal guest's assistant shifting uncomfortably, glancing around nervously. Something was about to happen, something that could either expose me or give me the perfect opening. I slowed my steps, blending seamlessly into the shadows, my mind racing through possibilities, outcomes, contingencies. And just as I reached the corner nearest the stage, my phone buzzed one last time, a final message, cryptic and chilling, make your move. But choose wisely, someone else is ready too. My heart pounded. I could feel the tension in the room tighten, the air thick with anticipation I alone seemed to sense. The royal guest raised their glass once more, the applause ringing like a countdown. And I was poised on the edge of revelation, invisible but all-seeing, ready to make my first move in a night that no one would ever forget. The storm was coming, and I was standing right at its eye. The room seemed to hold its breath. Every laugh, every clink of glasses, every flash of the cameras felt distant, as if the night itself had slowed down just for me. I stood at the edge of the stage, invisible, a shadow in plain sight. My mind raced, calculating every step, every glance, every subtle reaction I had witnessed all night. I knew what had to be done. The royal guest lifted their glass for the final toast. Cameras clicked incessantly, capturing the moment for the world to see, but none of them noticed me. I wasn't part of their perfect narrative. I had been relegated to the kitchen, to the background, to nothing. But tonight, that invisibility was my weapon. I slipped a hand into my pocket and felt the envelope I had taken earlier from the unattended folder. The contents were subtle, almost innocuous to anyone else, but to me they were explosive. Names, details, secrets enough to make people shift nervously in their seats. Enough to expose alliances, hidden betrayals, and the carefully constructed lies everyone had been clinging to. I glanced at her, the woman who had humiliated me earlier. She laughed at a joke someone made, her smile tight, forced. I could see the anxiety beneath it. She had underestimated me completely, and now she was about to see just how dangerous someone invisible could be. I took a step forward. No one noticed. The assistant shifted again, distracted, and that was all I needed. With calm, deliberate movements, I pulled the envelope out and let it slip unnoticed onto the edge of the stage. A small flap opened, and a few papers fell out. The crowd didn't see. The cameras didn't capture it. But the royal guest did. Their eyes flickered down, recognition dawning. For a moment, silence seemed to grip the hall. The royal guest's polite smile faltered ever so slightly, and the whispers began. The woman who had humiliated me leaned forward, glancing at the papers, confusion crossing her face. Her alliances, her careful manipulations, her power all at risk of being revealed. I stepped fully into the light now, letting them see me for the first time. The kitchen apron still on, my hands slightly wet from washing dishes, and yet I stood taller than I ever had. My eyes met hers, and in that moment, everything unspoken, the humiliation, the injustice, the months of being dismissed, found a voice in the silence between us. The royal guest raised an eyebrow, intrigued. They had seen enough to understand the gravity, enough to know that someone had been watching, remembering, and now had acted. The room shifted. People murmured, turning to see what had caused the sudden tension. Cameras caught the hint of chaos, but they didn't yet understand the story. I walked closer to the center, each step deliberate. The whispers grew louder, the tension palpable. The envelope, the dropped papers, the subtle exposure of secrets. It was enough to break the carefully constructed image of the evening. And I reveled in it, not with cruelty, but with a quiet satisfaction born of patience and careful observation. The woman who had tried to humiliate me now looked visibly shaken. She realized too late that the person she had dismissed all night, the one in the kitchen, the one she thought invisible, had orchestrated a moment that exposed truth and vulnerability in front of everyone. She opened her mouth to speak, to defend herself, but no words came. The royal guest stepped forward, taking control of the moment, their presence commanding. They glanced at me, and for the first time I felt acknowledged. It wasn't just revenge, it was justice. Not the petty kind that humiliated someone publicly, but the kind that revealed truth, that shifted the balance, that reminded everyone that invisibility is not weakness. Being unseen had allowed me to see everything, the cracks, the lies, the arrogance, and to act at the perfect moment. People started whispering more urgently now, realizing that something had changed. The host, flustered, tried to regain control, but the momentum had shifted. Cameras zoomed in, capturing my image, my presence finally undeniable. I felt the power of observation, of patience, of careful planning. Every slight, every insult, every ignored plea I had endured had culminated in this moment. I turned slowly toward her, the woman who had mocked me, and allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile. She understood now. The humiliation she had intended for me, the control she had tried to wield, all of it had been her undoing. And yet, I offered no vindictive words, only calm, quiet victory. She could see it in my eyes. I had won without raising my voice, without creating spectacle, simply by being patient, intelligent, and persistent. The royal guest, now fully aware of the tension and the subtleties, raised their glass once more. This time, it wasn't for the orchestrated event or the laughter of the crowd. It was an acknowledgement, a subtle nod to the fact that someone who had been invisible all night had not only witnessed everything, but had acted at the right moment to reveal the truth. The room's energy shifted dramatically. People began to reassess their positions, alliances, and assumptions. The woman who had humiliated me tried to mask her shock, tried to regain composure, but the power balance had irrevocably shifted. I had been invisible. I had been dismissed. But in those moments, I became unavoidable. I finally approached the royal guest. Polite nods, a quiet acknowledgement, and a brief exchange that conveyed more than words ever could. Recognition, respect, understanding. They had witnessed the shift, understood the subtlety, and acknowledged the strategy. It was validation I had never expected, and yet it felt like a culmination of every slight, every ignored plea, every moment of invisibility. And then, just as the tension began to settle, as the crowd tried to resume its applause and chatter, a new development shook the hall. Someone from the earlier messages, the one who had warned me, the one who hinted that someone else was ready, made a move. Their presence was sudden, their impact undeniable. The game had not ended. The storm I had initiated now collided with another force I had not fully anticipated. I froze for a moment, realizing that even as I had taken control, the night had more twists in store. But instead of fear, I felt excitement. I had navigated humiliation, invisibility, and injustice. Now, I was in the center of a storm of strategy, deception, and revelation, and I was ready. The royal guest watched, intrigued, as the new player revealed themselves, shifting the narrative yet again. The woman who had tried to humiliate me now looked terrified, uncertain, caught in the crossfire of consequences she hadn't anticipated. And I, standing in the hall, finally seen, finally recognized, felt the culmination of patience, observation, and calculated action ripple through me. The night had begun as a scene of humiliation, a reminder of invisibility and dismissal. It ended as a stage for revelation, strategy, and unexpected alliances. I had started in the shadows, pushed aside, ignored, but I emerged as a quiet force that no one could overlook. As the royal guests raised their glass one last time, a nod of acknowledgement toward me, I understood something profoundly satisfying. Revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about timing, patience, intelligence, and using the invisibility they assumed would silence me as my ultimate strength. And in that moment, as the applause and whispers washed over me, I smiled not with malice, but with the quiet triumph of someone who had been underestimated, overlooked, and finally, undeniably present. The night ended for some, but for me, the story had only just begun.